Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. I've got no rhythm today. I'm going to do a recent reads just to catch up with the stuff that I've been reading in the last week or so, let you know where I am. Still in the middle of a book buying ban. So these are all books that have been on my TBR for some time, which is a good thing. I had, I think, well over 100 books on my TBR at its peak, and I'm slowly whittling that down. I would say of the remaining books, I did a quick run through them, books that are still on my TBR. There's a good 70 to 80% of them that I still definitely want to read and just never got round to, always found excuses for. There are some there which I'm looking at now thinking, why do I have this? Why did I buy this? Or in some cases, how did this end up here? I don't recall ever having anything to do with this. I've actually got an example of that in one of the books that I read this week. Okay, so when I last left off, I was reading this bind up of three of the 87th Precinct novels. This is number 40, 41, and 42, I believe. Lullaby, Vespers, and Widows by Ed McBain. So I've read them, all the ones leading up to this. This is a project I started about 10 years ago. I'm now 40 books in, and there's about another 10 or 12, something like that, to go. And I'd put this off for a while, so I read them all as standalones, and then for some reason I decided to buy this one. It had the next three that I was looking for. When I go to eBay and look for what I need next in all the different series that I'm reading, I found this and picked this up. I'm not sure where, probably from eBay, and probably cheaper than it would have cost me to buy each of the three of them. Not a great idea, because when I have these bind ups, I read them one after the other. So took me a while to get to it. So I hadn't read any Ed McBain for a while, and then in this year of no new books, I went out, picked this off the shelf, and plowed through all three. Actually, thematically linked. Listen, the whole story about the 87th Precinct is the characters recur over and over and don't really age at the same time as they started writing these in 1958. By now, we're in early 1990s, and the characters are the same age. But with more up-to-date technology, I guess. But that's just the shtick of the 87th Precinct. But these are quite dark, all three of them. Lullaby involves the battering to and death of a young child. Vespers is the murder of a priest, and Widows, a lawyer and his mistress are killed, and then other people connected, peripherally connected, and then as each murder takes place, they find another connection back to the original. So some dark stuff, some fairly gruesome and unpleasant murders with some very dark motivations. There's always been humor in some of these, and then also some grimness as well. And the great thing about this bind-up edition has got a little introduction from only 2 pages from Ed McBain, which he must have written in sort of when this came out, which would have been a few years after the original books. So this, the books are published 89, 90, 91. And the introduction to this bind-up is from 2001, so 10 years after the third of these. Still loving McBain. There have been better and worse volumes in the series, but overall, he's just undeniable. So good to get back on the 87th Precinct horse, so to speak. Get 3 more under my belt. I don't have any more, so whenever I decide that I'm going to go out and buy books, I will still be buying the next 3 of these and have them, and I generally read 1 or 2 a year, and so I'll be done 3 or 4 years from now. The whole project will have taken me, I guess, 15 years, there or thereabouts, to read all the 87th Precinct novels. After that, I read another sort of crimey book. Again, this has been sitting on my TBR since last year. I bought this when it was longlisted for the Booker Prize, then didn't make the shortlist, and sort of fell off my desirability a little bit, but came back to it. I always knew I was going to get to this. Case study by Graham Gray Burnett. I'm saying it like an American. I read his earlier novel, his Bloody Project, when this was longlisted or shortlisted for the Booker. And it says longlisted, but it might have actually made the shortlist in 2016. And I remember admiring this more than loving it. So that kind of held me back a little, even though Case Study had good reviews, held me back a little bit because I wasn't opal, but I thought it was terrific. but didn't light a spark. I'm really pleased that I got to case study because it's a different book entirely. This is a funny book. Yes, there is some darkness at its heart, and there's some psychiatry or psychotherapy and references to R.D. Laing, and then there's a fictional psychotherapist at the heart of this. We have a fantastically unreliable, as my brain is, a fantastically unreliable narrator who is telling the story and visiting the psychotherapist because her sister has committed suicide, and she goes to the psychotherapist because she believes that he's responsible. And the whole thing is framed as her notebooks have been given 40 years later to someone else who sent them to the writer, Graham McCrae Burnett, and he's telling the stories. So there's stories within stories, an unreliable narrator at the heart of it, some weird 60s free love psychotherapy, and this bizarre character, and properly funny, but also kind of disturbing. It's a dark book. It's a very interesting book. I enjoyed this much more than his bloody project. Is that really the name of it? His bloody project. Enjoyed Case Study much more, and really, I think a superior work that funny. I was not expecting him to have written a funny book, and there are laugh out loud moments, and darkness to it as well, which is delicious. The dark and the comedy together. Case Study, Graham McCrae Burnett, loved that. Then, wondering what I was going to pick next. I have a novel which I'm currently in the middle of reading, but I put that off. I wasn't ready to start that yet, so I'm looking through the TBR design, and I found this book. I don't know how this got into my apartment. I believe someone was here and must have left it here, because I certainly didn't buy this. This was a huge, massive best-selling book in the UK. I'm talking about This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. Adam Kay was a doctor. He qualified as a doctor and worked for several years in London until he just couldn't take it anymore and left. So he'd gone through all the years getting his degree, working in hospital, getting promoted through the ranks of hospital, and getting ready to reach the point where finally he might actually be able to afford his bus fare in, or his parking at work every single day. It was an accumulation, an aggregation of events that just led him to walk away. And this project starts 6 months afterwards. The medical registrar lets him know that his medical license is not being renewed, and therefore, and so he goes into the attic and finds all the notebooks that he kept, all the diaries that he kept during his years of training. And this is the book based on that, which I'm not doing justice at all. So clearly there is an underlying theme of melancholy, because there's a man who's turned his back on a profession that he had dedicated himself to, and so we want to know why, what has caused him to walk away from the medical profession. But it's just bloody funny. So it's a series of diary entries. Every single, whether it's 1 or 2 paragraphs, or whether it's like a page and a half, each one has build up and delivery of a punchline that makes me laugh out loud. Or if I'm lying in bed next to my wife who's trying to sleep, makes me shake, clamp my hand over my face, because he finds the humor in the darkness. So to give you just some context, his specialty when he gets through his first year, you have to specialize whether you're going to do surgery, or whether you've all seen ER, whether you're going to be a dermatologist, and his specialty is OBS, gynae, obstetrics and gynecology, or as again, so I apologize in advance for his phrase, and it seems to me this is the common way of describing it. OBS and gynae is referred to amongst the junior doctors as brats and twats. Again, apologies, but that appealed to my puerile sense of humor. It's silly, it's dark, as funny, but the jokes here are really good. He talks about the first time he delivers a baby with a Von Tews, and describes it literally, not literally, it describes it being a suction hoover, which is inserted and the baby is pulled out of the mother. And the first time he does it by himself, and he's feeling like he's finally made it, and he's going to be a doctor who works with delivering babies. And the supervisor says, "Well done, that was a really great job." And he looks up and says, "Thanks," and realizes the supervisor's talking to the mother who's just given birth. So that's a sort of light bit of humor. There is darker humor. There's a lot of bodily secretions, a lot of vomit and other even nastier things, a lot of blood, and some sadness, of course, but he manages to remain upbeat through most of it until it's all too much. The long hours, the lack of wages, the lack of appreciation, which is not why any doctor ever gets into the medical profession, so that people will pat them on the head and say, "You're fantastic," but just the total sense that the society undervalues the role that these people are playing in other people's lives. And this is, of course, again, context for American views. This is all in the context of the National Health, which is a government-funded public health service, which the UK is rightly and should rightly be proud of, that everyone has free access to healthcare, and yet successive governments have reduced or at least not increased wages according to inflation, and undervalued doctors, and required more and more hours, so that there is a massive mental health crisis within NHS workers. And this predates the pandemic. It's through the pandemic and after, I'm sure, even worse. So this was a massive, massive, massive hit when this came out, this book, and justly so. You know, I'm coming to it 5 years after everyone else did. The write-ups in the beginning, everybody is on it. Every newspaper reviewed it. The comments from Stephen Fry, Joe Brandes, comedian, David Baddiel, Russell Howard, comedians, Chris Addison, comedian, writer, Minnie Driver, Ian Rankin, Mark Haddon, Danny Wallace, Shapi Khorsandi, Jack Whitehall, Bridget Christie, Mark Watson, Pam Ayres of all people, Milton Jones, Joe Lycett. I mean, a wall-to-wall A-list British comedians have all given blurbs, and they were added to this edition of this book. So this, I think, is not the first edition, so there's some extra bonus entries at the end, but really, really funny, but really sort of important in terms of understanding what doctors and nurses and everyone who works in the NHS goes through and how tough it is for them, so that we should all appreciate them more. But mostly just funny. And he's built, he's gone on tour, and he's done some comedy writing, and ex-Dr. Adam Kay has made a career from this. But it's everything people said it was. I would not have picked it up, but it was there on my TBR. I didn't buy it. It's the kind of book I usually kind of avoid because it's so popular. But if you just need half a day of laughing, but laughing where there's meaning and pain behind the laughter, this is going to hurt by Adam Kay. Really fantastic. And then fell back on one of my go-tos. I've got, I'm always reading comic books. This is, I'm trying to read almost everything that Will Eisner published in book form. There's a whole, this is Kitchen Sink Press. Is it? This is Kitchen Sink Press. So I've got this lovely library edition, which was withdrawn from Dundee City Council Central Library, that I picked up secondhand. Who's published this? Oh, this is not Kitchen Sink. This is distributed to the comic market by Poorhouse Press, distributed to the book trade and art craft supply markets by Northlight Press. I know Kitchen Sink Press done lots of reprints of Will Eisner, and I pick them up when I can. Every now and then, if I'm looking for new books, I'll go on eBay and search for Will Eisner and see if there's stuff of his that I haven't read. This is Comics and Sequential Art. So this is a book. This is not a comic book. This is a book about how comic books are made. So a lot of text at the frame and talking about what it means, how movement works from one panel to the next. The great thing about Will Eisner's version of this is he uses examples from his own art. Will Eisner was a prolific writer and artist. He makes the case here, a case that I don't necessarily fully adhere to, that primary in the creation of comic books, or what he calls sequential art, is the artist. So the writer can come up with a plot, but really the same plot or the same two lines that a writer asks, the artist can do anything with. He can do it all in one panel, so you see everything in one go, you know what's going on, or he can do it over 3 panels, and you see the passage of time, or an emphasis, or time slowing down, or time. It's all in the hands of the artist to fulfill that vision of the writer, and he's a big. Now, he can say this, Will Eisner, because he was a tremendous draftsman, a fantastic artist, and also he most of the stuff that he drew was his own writing. In my own life, I tend to follow. I read a lot of comic books, if you're not aware, and I tend to follow writers rather than artists. So as I don't necessarily swallow his, even though I have huge admiration for Will Eisner, not a big fan of the spirit, but I've loved some of his other work, and I've got a bunch of it, and I'd like to get more. Here's a fantastic thing that he presents in the middle and talks about it. This is Hamlet on a rooftop. And there we've got Hamlet, who looks like an extra from the movie Hair, with the open way, or the movie The Warriors, open waistcoat with a headband as a hippie sort of 70s look, and goes through the entire to be or not to be soliloquy, and I think it's kind of fabulous. To die, to sleep a chance to dream, and you can see the art is fantastic, and he uses this story that he wrote and must have published somewhere as an example of something like paneling, something like telling stories, something the artist can bring. Of course, this was a massive influence on Scott McCloud, who I was talking about a few weeks ago when a few videos ago when I was talking about Zott, but his pioneering work, Understanding Comics, which owes a huge debt to Will Eisner's Comics and Sequential Art. So this is first published in the Will Eisner book, first published in 1985, and this is a reprint from 2001. And then you've got Scott McCloud's book comes out in 1993. So 8 years after Will Eisner, you've got Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, where the whole thing is drawn as a comic book, but a comic book about how comics are made and what they mean. There's a fantastic section here on Ceci n'est pas une pipe, and the Magritte's painting, The Treachery of Image, The Treachery of Images, I beg your pardon. And of course, this is not a pipe, it's a painting of a pipe. Or as McCloud then points out, it's not a painting of a pipe, this is a drawing of a painting of a pipe, and so on and so on and so on. This is fantastic. I think a superior work to Eisner, but standing on the shoulders of giants. And McCloud at the beginning, he thanks all the people who helped him, and extra special thanks to Will Eisner, who was still around at this time. And this book doesn't exist without the work Will Eisner does. I think it's actually a more successful work, but I'm happy to have picked up Eisner. I'm going to carry on. I think there are 2 more volumes of McCloud's work, of which I had the second and never got around to reading the third. I think there are also 2 more in this series that he wrote. Will Eisner, of course, was also a teacher. So he wasn't just putting out a book for the sake of it. He did a lot of work. He was lecturing in comic art and training artists, as well as being a very successful comic book writer and artist in his own right. Anyway, that was Will Eisner, Comics and Sequential Art. And then after that, a book I'm currently reading is the novel I said I'd put off, The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. And I'll talk about this when I finish reading 100 pages in. It's fantastic. So many books we talk about being lyrical and poetic, and the writing here is exquisite. The subject is hard, so I'll talk about this when I'm read. But finally got around to reading The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr., which the world and his wife already read. 18 minutes. God bless. Bye.